On his wedding day, Daniel didn't look at the bride. He looked at the board members. Marrying the CEO's daughter wasn't about love. It was about leverage, access, legacy. The cameras flashed as he slid the ring onto Isabel's finger, heir to a $1 billion empire. Across the ballroom, a quiet maid adjusted a silver tray and kept her eyes down. No one noticed her, not when Daniel's friends laughed and whispered, "From nothing to royalty." Not when Isabel's father raised a glass and announced Daniel would soon join the executive board, and definitely not when the maid stepped into a private elevator after the reception, using a fingerprint that unlocked the top floor. Because what Daniel didn't know was that the company he just married into didn't belong to the CEO. It belonged to her, and she had been watching him the entire time. Daniel didn't believe in fairy tales, he believed in leverage. As he stood at the altar beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than his childhood home, he wasn't thinking about vows. He was calculating trajectory. Marriage, in his mind, was not romance, it was alignment. Isabelle Laurent, the CEO's daughter, smiled at him with polished perfection. Cameras flashed, investors filled the front rows, industry executives whispered approvingly. "From analyst to family in 3 years," someone murmured. Daniel liked that. He had grown up watching his mother clean office buildings at night while executives in tailored suits walked past without seeing her. He learned something early. Power wasn't earned slowly. It was accessed strategically, and today he had accessed it. When Isabel's father, CEO of Laurent Global Holdings, stood to toast them, Daniel felt it, the room shifting toward him. "Welcome to the family," the CEO said warmly, and soon, "to the board." Applause. Daniel squeezed Isabel's hand, not out of affection, out of victory. Across the ballroom, a maid adjusted silverware on a nearby table. Her uniform was simple, her posture composed. She kept her eyes lowered as Daniel passed her on his way to greet investors. He didn't see her, or maybe he did, briefly. "Careful with that," he muttered when she stepped slightly into his path with a tray. "These suits aren't cheap." His tone wasn't cruel, just dismissive, the kind reserved for people who exist in the background. "Yes, sir," she replied softly. But for a split second, barely noticeable, her eyes lifted. And she looked at him differently, not intimidated, not impressed, just observant. Daniel didn't notice. He was too busy shaking hands with venture partners and discussing expansion strategies. By dessert, he was already outlining acquisition ideas with Isabel's father. "We can streamline operations," Daniel said confidently, "cut redundant departments, restructure lower-tier staffing. Efficiency drives dominance." The CEO studied him. "And culture? Culture follows leadership," Daniel replied smoothly, "and leadership requires strength." The maid passed again, refilling glasses. As she moved away, the CEO's eyes lingered on her briefly, almost thoughtfully. Daniel missed that too. Later that evening, while guests danced under gold lighting, the maid stepped into a private elevator tucked behind the ballroom corridor. She pressed her thumb to a hidden biometric scanner. Access granted. The elevator rose, past executive floors, past corporate suites, to the restricted level. When the doors opened, the atmosphere changed. No music, no champagne, just quiet. She removed her gloves slowly. Inside a dark office, overlooking the city skyline, a framed document sat on the desk. Laurent Global Holdings, controlling interest, trust, 55% ownership, beneficiary, Elena Laurent. She looked out at the celebration below, at Daniel laughing, champagne in hand, believing he had just married into power. A faint smile touched her lips. Some people marry into empires, others build them, and tonight Daniel had just pledged his life to a company that did not belong to the woman he kissed at the altar. It belonged to the maid he barely saw, and she had been watching him long before he ever noticed her. The first board meeting after the wedding felt like a coronation. Daniel adjusted his tailored navy suit as he entered the executive floor. The glass doors parted automatically. Assistants nodded with new respect. His name was now followed by something heavier than Director of Strategy. Laurent. He liked how it sounded. Inside the boardroom, Isabel sat beside him, scrolling through her tablet with calm detachment. Her father stood at the head of the table, commanding as always. Before we begin, the CEO said, I'd like to formally welcome Daniel to the Strategic Advisory Panel. Not the board. Daniel noticed that immediately. Polite applause followed. Strategic Advisory. Not voting member. He kept smiling. The meeting began. Daniel presented a bold restructuring plan. Automation in logistics, staff reductions in hospitality divisions, outsourcing lower-tier operations overseas. We trim inefficiencies, he said confidently, clicking through slides. Margins increase by 18% within 12 months. A few board members nodded, but when the vote for preliminary approval came, hands hesitated. One by one, they lowered. Motion denied, legal counsel announced calmly. Daniel blinked. On what grounds? Majority stakeholder concern, one director replied. Daniel leaned back. And who exactly holds that majority? Silence. Isabel shifted slightly. It's structured through a trust, she said, operationally private. Daniel frowned. So someone who doesn't even sit in this room can override strategy? Her father's tone hardened. That someone built this room. The words lingered longer than intended. Daniel forced a laugh. Well, I'd love to meet our invisible king. Her father didn't smile. You already have. The room fell quiet. Daniel searched their faces for a punchline. There wasn't one. The meeting moved on, but something unsettled him. Every major decision referenced trust approval. Every expansion required majority alignment. He wasn't entering power, he was orbiting it. That evening, he stayed late reviewing equity structures.
I can't believe you would
His
do that.
4% stake
It's
was
not what you
clearly
think.
outlined.
Let me explain.
Isabel
How can I
held
trust you
9%,
now?
her father 32%. That left 55%, held by the Laurent Strategic Trust. No public filings revealed the direct beneficiary, just layers of legal shielding. Daniel closed the file slowly. In the lobby, cleaning staff moved quietly between marble columns. One of them, the same maid from the wedding, walked past him with a tablet in hand. Not a cleaning tablet. A financial dashboard glowed briefly before the screen dimmed. Daniel barely registered it. He was too busy calling Isabel. Why didn't you tell me about the trust? He asked sharply. It's always existed, she replied calmly. Founder's clause. It protects the company from emotional leadership. Emotional? Daniel scoffed. I'm practical. Are you? She asked. The line went quiet. Upstairs, in a restricted executive office, the maid removed her uniform jacket and replaced it with a tailored blazer hanging inside a private closet. She reviewed the same restructuring proposal Daniel had presented. Her pen circled one phrase: lower-tier staffing redundancy. Her expression didn't change, but she opened a file labeled Daniel Mercer, Behavioral Assessment. Power reveals character, and Daniel was beginning to show his. Daniel stopped sleeping well. At first, it was excitement, late-night strategy calls, expansion models, growth forecasts. Now it was something else. Every proposal he submitted required trust review. Every initiative stalled in quiet, procedural delays. Even minor staffing adjustments were flagged for cultural impact assessment. Cultural impact. He hated that phrase. One evening, he confronted Isabel in their penthouse overlooking the river. How much influence does this trust actually have? He asked, loosening his tie. Isabel didn't look up from her wineglass. Majority control. That's not what I mean. Who is it? A committee? A ghost? Your father's silent partner? She hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. It's complicated. Daniel's jaw tightened. I married into this company. I deserve transparency. Isabel finally met his eyes. You married me, Daniel. The distinction irritated him. The next morning, he requested a full equity breakdown from legal. It arrived in a clean 12-page document. 4%, Daniel Mercer, 9%, Isabelle Laurent, 32%, Charles Laurent, 55%, Laurent Strategic Trust, Voting Control, Trust Majority, Clause 8.2, Trust reserves unilateral right to override executive decisions in cases of ethical concern. Ethical concern. Daniel read it twice. What qualifies as ethical concern? He asked legal counsel during a follow-up meeting. Leadership conduct, strategic integrity, treatment of personnel, the lawyer replied calmly. Daniel gave a tight smile. So basically anything. Only if it becomes necessary. The tone felt rehearsed. Later that afternoon, Daniel toured one of Laurent's hospitality properties. He walked through the lobby with executives trailing behind him. A junior manager approached nervously. "Sir, there have been concerns about proposed layoffs." Daniel didn't slow down. Efficiency requires sacrifice. Behind him, the cleaning staff froze mid-motion as he passed. He didn't notice the maid watching from across the marble floor. She wasn't holding a mop. She was holding a tablet. That evening, Daniel received an email marked priority. Emergency board meeting, Monday 9 a.m. Subject, leadership review and structural clarification. His stomach tightened. He called Isabel immediately. "What is this?" he demanded. "It's procedural," she said, too quickly. "Procedural for what?" "For alignment." "With who?" he snapped. Silence. Then softly, "You've been assertive." "I've been strategic. There's a difference." Daniel hung up. Across the city, in a private executive office high above the skyline, the maid sat at a long walnut table. Gone was the uniform. In its place, a tailored charcoal suit. Around her sat 3 senior legal advisors and 1 compliance officer. She reviewed a digital report projected on the wall. Daniel Mercer, staff dismissal, language concerning. Strategic intent, aggressive consolidation, cultural assessment, high risk, motivational analysis, status-driven advancement. One advisor spoke carefully. "You could remove him quietly." She shook her head. "No," she said calmly. "If character is revealed in private, consequences must be revealed in public." She closed the file. "Schedule the vote." Down below in the penthouse he thought symbolized arrival, Daniel stared out at the city lights. He believed he was fighting for control. He didn't realize control had never been his. And on Monday morning, he would finally learn who had been sitting above him all along. Monday arrived too quickly. Daniel walked into the executive boardroom with measured confidence. Navy suit, controlled expression, the kind of face a man wears when he believes pressure is temporary. Isabel was already seated. Her father stood by the window, hands behind his back. The rest of the board avoided eye contact. Daniel took his seat. "Let's get this over with," he said smoothly. "If this is about restructuring language, I'm happy to clarify my intent." "It's not about language," legal counsel replied. The door opened. Daniel didn't turn at first. He assumed it was an assistant. Then the room shifted. Chairs straightened, eyes lifted. Silence fell in a way that didn't feel procedural. It felt historical. Daniel turned. The maid walked in, but not the woman from the lobby, not the quiet figure in neutral uniform. This woman wore a tailored charcoal suit. Her hair was styled with deliberate elegance. No tray, no gloves, no lowered gaze. She walked past him without hesitation and took the seat at the head of the table. Daniel blinked once, twice. No one corrected the moment. Legal counsel stood. "For the record," he began calmly, "this session is being held under Clause 8.2 of the Laurent Strategic Trust." Daniel looked between them. "What is this?" The lawyer continued. "Laurent Global Holdings has operated under majority control of the Laurent Strategic Trust since its founding revision 15 years ago." A document slid across the table. Daniel glanced at the heading. Primary beneficiary and acting trustee, Elena Laurent. He looked up slowly. The woman at the head of the table met his eyes, not cold, not angry, certain. "Elena?" Daniel's voice lowered. "You're the founder's daughter," she said evenly. "And the majority shareholder." Silence pressed against his ears. Isabel's face had drained of color. Even her father looked smaller in the presence of it. "You were cleaning floors," Daniel whispered. "I was observing leadership," she corrected. The lawyer continued. "Mr. Mercer, your recent conduct triggered a review under ethical oversight provisions." A screen illuminated behind them, clips of internal meeting recordings. His voice, "Lower-tier staffing is replaceable. Culture follows power. Marriage accelerates access." Each sentence sounded different now, sharper, smaller. "You married for leverage," Elena Ben said calmly. "You restructured without regard for people. You dismissed staff like overhead. You believed proximity to status equaled authority." Daniel stood abruptly.
What are you talking about?
"This is a setup." "No," she replied. "This is accountability." She leaned forward
What are you
slightly.
talking about?
"I worked in this building for 18 months. I watched who you greeted, who you ignored, who you respected when you thought they mattered. His pulse pounded in his ears. You judged worth by title, she continued. That is incompatible with leadership. Legal counsel spoke again. By majority vote of the trust, Daniel Mercer is removed from all strategic and advisory positions effective immediately. The words felt surgical, precise, final. And his shares? Daniel asked hoarsely. Subject to dilution under reputational risk clause, the lawyer replied. Elena stood. Power doesn't corrupt character, she said quietly. It exposes it. The boardroom doors opened. Security waited outside. Daniel looked at Isabel. She couldn't meet his eyes. He looked at her father, the man who had once toasted him. Nothing. He had entered the room believing he belonged there. He left realizing he never did. And as the doors closed behind him, Eleanor Laurent remained seated at the head of the table. Not victorious, not emotional, just rightful. The headlines were quiet. Laurent Global didn't leak scandals. They corrected them. Daniel's removal was announced as a strategic leadership realignment. No drama, no humiliation in the press, but in executive circles, everyone knew. His calls stopped being returned. The investment firm that once courted him postponed meetings indefinitely. A tech startup he'd been advising quietly replaced him. Power leaves silently, and when it does, it takes the room with it. 3 weeks later, Daniel stood outside a mid-sized consulting office downtown. Not glass towers, not marble floors, just a modest corporate building with functional lighting. He adjusted his resume, former strategic advisor, Laurent Global. The interviewer glanced at it briefly. You were there less than a year, she noted. Board restructuring, Daniel replied tightly. She nodded politely, but her eyes said something else. Risk. After the interview, Daniel walked out into the city that once felt like his. It looked the same, but it no longer responded to him. Across town, Elena stood before a leadership development summit hosted inside one of Laurent's renovated properties. No mention of the boardroom incident, no public dragging of his name. Instead, she spoke about structure. Titles do not create authority, she said calmly to the audience. Character sustains it. The room was quiet. When leadership becomes about access instead of responsibility, organizations decay from the inside. She paused. True power isn't measured by who bows when you enter a room. It's measured by how people feel when you leave it. Soft applause followed. Afterward, a junior staff member approached her nervously. Thank you, the young woman said, for protecting the hospitality division. Eleanor smiled gently. No one is lower tier, only poorly led. Back in his apartment, smaller now, Daniel scrolled through business updates. Laurent's stock was rising. Employee retention had improved. A new ethics-based leadership initiative was trending in corporate media. Elena Laurent was being profiled as the invisible heir who rebuilt the culture. He closed the article. For the first time, the silence wasn't defensive. It was reflective. He remembered the lobby staff he had ignored. The confidence he confused with superiority. The marriage he treated like a ladder. He thought he chose status over character, but in truth, he never understood which one built empires. And somewhere high above the city skyline, in an office without ego but filled with intention, Elena reviewed quarterly projections. Not to dominate, not to prove a point, but to build something sustainable, because power that is earned through discipline lasts. Power that is taken through image collapses, and in the end, the Maid had never been beneath him. He had simply failed to see who was standing above.